Understanding unspoken communication is one of the most overlooked skills in human relationships. We are taught from childhood to pay attention to words, to listen for explanations, to respond to sentences and statements. But life rarely speaks to us so directly. People, especially those who have experienced emotional turbulence, often communicate more through their silence than they ever could with their voice. Silence becomes their language, their shield, and sometimes their only safe way of existing around others. When someone remains quiet, most of us rush to fill the gap with assumptions. We assume they are uninterested, disconnected, or emotionally unavailable. We assume their silence reflects their attitude toward us. But silence is rarely that simple. In the context of the story about the mute millionaire, the silence was not a lack of communication. It was communication in its most raw, unfiltered form. It expressed fear, protection, caution, and observation more loudly than any spoken sentence could. To understand unspoken communication, one must first understand the psychology behind silence. Humans often retreat into quietness when they feel overwhelmed, misunderstood, or unsafe. When a person believes their words may be judged, dismissed, or used against them, they choose silence. Not because they have nothing to say, but because speaking feels like a risk. Silence, therefore, becomes a deep emotional strategy, a carefully built shelter where vulnerability can stay hidden. It reveals that the person is processing, thinking, analyzing, or waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. In relationships, recognizing this silent communication is essential. When two individuals interact, not every detail is spoken. Body language, eye contact, hesitation, and timing all deliver messages stronger than words. A lowered gaze might signal fear. A slight distance in posture may reveal self-protection. A long pause before answering could indicate someone is choosing their words with emotional precision. When we learn to read these signs, we begin to understand the emotional world behind a person's silence. The story teaches that silence is not emptiness, it is presence. The millionaire's quietness was not the absence of personality, it was the presence of internal struggle, of stories buried beneath the surface, of emotions shaped by past experiences. Many people hide their deepest truths behind quietness, not because they want to deceive others, but because they don't yet know how to share these truths safely. Silence becomes the waiting room before vulnerability finally enters. Understanding unspoken communication also requires patience. Silence needs time. It needs space. If someone remains quiet, forcing them to speak only pushes them deeper into retreat. But when you allow silence to exist without judgment, you create an environment where the other person can step out of their emotional hiding place. In the story, the moment privacy arrived after the wedding was the moment safety appeared. Only then did the silence finally break. This shows that communication does not happen when we demand it. It happens when a person feels secure enough to offer it. There is also a profound lesson here about emotional intelligence, the ability to observe before interpreting. Instead of labeling silence as rejection or indifference, we should approach it with curiosity. What is this silence protecting? What emotions lie beneath it? What history shaped this quietness? Understanding unspoken communication teaches us to slow down and truly see the person in front of us, not just the version shaped by their words, but the version shaped by their fears, their past, and their unspoken desires. Silence, when listened to correctly, reveals more truth than any speech. It reminds us that communication is not just about what is said. It is about everything a person feels before they gather the courage to speak. The psychology of emotional walls is rooted in one simple truth: people protect themselves in the ways they were once hurt. When someone withdraws in a relationship, it is rarely because they lack feelings. More often, it is because they have felt too much in the past and were left without the tools to manage that emotional weight. Emotional walls form slowly, built layer by layer from experiences that were never fully understood, processed, or healed. These walls become invisible shields, guiding how a person interacts with the world while simultaneously limiting how deeply they allow others to enter their emotional space. Individuals who build emotional barriers often do so unconsciously. Their behavior, silence, distance, avoidance, may appear intentional, but beneath it lies a history of pain they never resolved. A harsh childhood, betrayal, abandonment, or even a single traumatic relationship can teach someone that vulnerability equals danger. Over time, the brain rewires itself to anticipate disappointment before it even happens. Instead of reaching out, the person retreats. Instead of expressing feelings, they suppress them. Instead of allowing intimacy, they create emotional distance because it feels safer than the possibility of being hurt again. In relationships, emotional walls become most noticeable when the connection deepens. The closer someone gets, the more threatened the individual feels. They fear losing themselves, being misunderstood, or being judged in the same way they once were. The withdrawal isn't a lack of love, it's a survival response. The mind believes retreating protects the heart. Ironically, the very walls built to prevent emotional pain often end up creating emotional loneliness. Past wounds play a powerful role in shaping these psychological defenses. When an emotional injury occurs and is left unresolved, the mind stores it as a warning for the future. For example, if someone once opened up and was rejected, criticized, or dismissed, they learn not to open up again. Their silence becomes armor. Their distance becomes a habit. Their reluctance to express themselves becomes a learned behavior formed from past harm. In many ways, the emotional walls are not obstacles. They are symptoms of hurt that was never allowed to heal. Unprocessed experiences complicate this further. When emotions are pushed aside instead of acknowledged, they do not disappear. They settle into the subconscious. People begin reacting to present situations with the emotions of past wounds. A gentle question may feel like an interrogation. A moment of closeness may trigger fear. A new relationship may summon memories of old betrayals. Without realizing it, the person is living in a cycle where the past controls the present, influencing decisions, reactions, and attachments. Emotional walls also create misunderstandings. Partners often interpret withdrawal as disinterest or coldness, when in reality it is a quiet plea for safety. The person behind the wall is not trying to push others away, they are trying to protect the fragile parts of themselves that were once left exposed and hurt. They may want connection deeply, but the fear of being wounded again keeps them frozen between desire and avoidance. Understanding the psychology of emotional walls teaches us that healing requires patience and compassion. You cannot break someone's walls with force, but you can help them feel safe enough to lower them on their own. Trust must be built slowly. Consistency, calm communication, and emotional stability help the person realize they are no longer in the environment that once harmed them. Little by little, the mind learns that vulnerability does not always lead to pain. The walls that once seemed impenetrable begin to crack, allowing genuine connection to form. Emotional barriers are not signs of weakness, they are signs of survival. They show how resilient the human heart is, even when wounded. With understanding, patience, and emotional awareness, these walls can soften, they can shift, and eventually they can fall, revealing the person who has been waiting behind them, hoping for a moment when connection finally feels safe again. The power of vulnerability in connections lies in its ability to change the entire emotional landscape between two people. When someone chooses to open up, even for a brief moment, it can shift the dynamic from uncertainty to understanding, from distance to closeness, and from guardedness to genuine connection. In the story, the moment the millionaire finally speaks becomes more than just the breaking of silence. It becomes the breaking of a lifelong pattern of self-protection. That single decision to be vulnerable gives insight into who they truly are beneath the layers of silence, composure, and emotional discipline they had maintained for so long. Vulnerability is not simply about speaking, it is about allowing oneself to be seen, For some individuals, especially those who carry deep emotional scars or who have built their identities around strength and independence, being vulnerable feels like stepping into unknown territory. They fear judgment, rejection, or the possibility that their honesty will be used against them. Thus, vulnerability becomes a risk. But when it finally occurs, it holds a transformative power because it signals trust. It communicates that the other person has created a space safe enough for authenticity to emerge. In relationships, vulnerability acts as the bridge between two worlds. Without it, people remain strangers even if they are physically close. With it, emotional intimacy begins to develop. The moment the millionaire speaks is symbolic of this shift. It shows that the internal barriers they once relied on no longer serve them in this new environment. It reveals that the need for connection has finally outweighed the fear of exposure. This act teaches that vulnerability often arrives late because the path to feeling safe is rarely linear. But its timing does not diminish its value. If anything, late vulnerability often carries even more weight because it comes from someone who resisted it deeply. This moment also highlights that vulnerability reveals hidden layers of a person, layers that silence often conceals. Behind reserved personalities, quiet behavior, or emotional detachment, there are stories, fears, desires, and insecurities that people do not immediately show. Vulnerability uncovers these layers gently, allowing the other person to understand the emotional architecture behind the individual's behavior. It becomes a powerful educational moment, teaching that what we see on the surface is never the full reality. Everyone has private battles, unspoken fears, and buried truths that they protect until the right moment arrives. One of the most profound lessons here is that vulnerability does not weaken a relationship. It strengthens it. It builds trust, fosters empathy, and removes assumptions. When one person opens up, the other begins to see the depth of their humanity. This shared understanding creates an emotional connection rooted not in perfection, but in authenticity. It teaches that relationships thrive not when people pretend to be strong, but when they dare to be real. The story also demonstrates how vulnerability can reshape someone's identity in the eyes of another. Before speaking, the millionaire may have seemed distant, mysterious, or emotionally unavailable. But once they shared their truth, even briefly, they became more human, relatable, and emotionally accessible. That single act of honesty transforms perception, proving that vulnerability holds the power to rewrite the narrative of who a person is. Moreover, vulnerability teaches reciprocity. When one person opens up, it often encourages the other to do the same. It invites emotional exchange. It signals that connection is possible. This shared vulnerability becomes the foundation of deeper communication, creating a space where both individuals feel safe to express their thoughts, fears, and desires. Ultimately, vulnerability is not an endpoint, it is a beginning. It marks the start of emotional transparency, the beginning of trust building, and the opening of a path toward genuine intimacy. The moment the millionaire finally speaks reminds us that vulnerability, even if delayed, has the power to change everything. It teaches that the courage to reveal even a small part of one's inner world can open doors to deeper connection and reveal the hidden layers that make relationships meaningful, real, and transformative. The importance of observing, rather than assuming, lies at the heart of understanding human behavior, and the story illustrates this lesson with clarity. People often rely on assumptions because they offer quick answers. Assumptions fill the gaps when we don't have information, giving us a sense of certainty, even when that certainty is built on imagination rather than truth. But the danger is that assumptions create false realities. They cause misunderstandings, misjudgments, and emotional distance long before genuine communication has the chance to occur. The story shows how drastically one's perception of another can change the moment their true voice is heard and their hidden story is finally revealed. When someone is silent, distant, or difficult to read, it's easy to project meanings onto their behavior. You might believe they are uninterested, emotionally closed, or indifferent. You might think they have nothing to say, or simply do not care. But observation teaches a different approach. Observation requires patience, attention, and emotional intelligence. It teaches you to watch behavior without immediately attaching meaning to it. It teaches you to look for patterns, subtle cues, and gentle shifts in energy that reveal more about a person than the assumptions you jump to. Assumptions limit understanding. Observation expands it. When you assume something about a person, you lock them into a story you wrote without their participation. You judge them based on your own fears, past experiences, or expectations. This creates a version of them that may be completely different from who they really are. Observation, on the other hand, allows the truth to unfold naturally. You begin to notice small expressions, the way someone breathes when nervous, the hesitation in their eyes, the quiet attempts at connection that may not fit the typical form of communication. These details become clues to a deeper reality that assumptions will always miss. In the story, the moment the millionaire finally speaks becomes a powerful educational moment because it shatters the assumptions built around their silence. What once seemed like coldness or disinterest is revealed to be fear, uncertainty, or a need for safety. Their voice uncovers a story that was invisible from the outside. This shift reminds us that people are often far more complex than they appear. Silence may hold trauma, distance may hide vulnerability, and unfamiliar behavior may come from internal struggles we know nothing about. Without observing, and without giving someone the time and space to reveal themselves, we misinterpret their intentions entirely. Observation also teaches humility. It reminds us that we do not know everything, that our perspective is limited, and that every human carries layers of emotion and history that are not outwardly visible. Approaching others with curiosity rather than certainty allows relationships to grow in healthier ways. It opens the door to empathy, because when you observe without judging, you begin to see the person as a whole human being rather than a puzzle you rush to solve. Another important lesson is that observation creates emotional safety. When someone feels watched with understanding rather than judged through assumptions, they become more comfortable expressing themselves. They feel seen rather than analyzed, understood rather than categorized. This emotional safety is what leads to moments like the one in the story. The moment when a person who has been silent finally finds the courage to speak. Observation makes space for truth, while assumptions suffocate it. The story teaches that what you think you know is often incomplete. It encourages you to pause and consider that every person has a hidden narrative shaped by experiences you may never see. Only by observing can you recognize these narratives without distorting them. The first words someone finally shares can rewrite everything you believed about them, showing you how inaccurate assumptions can be and how transformative genuine understanding is. Ultimately, observing instead of assuming is an act of respect. It honors the complexity of human emotions and acknowledges that real understanding requires patience. The moment you stop assuming and start observing is the moment you begin truly seeing people for who they are, not who you imagined them to be.